What would you do if you had available to you an extra 68 8-hour working days in the next 12 months? Are there some projects that you'd like to start, perhaps a business, or maybe even start a business, or some personal projects, or maybe there's some jobs around the house or the cars, or some time you could spend on yourself exercising, or a hobby you'd like to take up, or a project you'd like to finish? I'm called Adrian, and I would like you to ponder that question as we go through this video, because in this video I'd like to talk to you about something I came across recently that really shocked me about the way I was spending my time, and I thought I'd share it with you in case it gives you some ideas about some places you can find a bunch of time to work on the things you really want to work on as well. I was cleaning up some paperwork recently, and in some of the archive boxes I came across some of my old mind maps. Now, if you don't know me, I am a big proponent of mind mapping. I think it's absolutely incredible. It's something I've been involved in over the last 30 plus years. I do many, many mind maps every day. On these old mind maps dating back into the mid-90s, I was just glancing at them and I realized just how productive I was back then. And I was thinking about it, well, I get a lot done now, but I'm nowhere near as productive as I was back then. And I wondered what was different, and it suddenly occurred to me that things like this, things like all these behind me, that really were just starting to come to the fore. Certainly the smartphones were, but the computers were. They're becoming a very big part of my life. And I started to think about it, and I thought, well, I wonder how much time I'm actually wasting here, spending here doing things that are not productive at all, that are just, what did I hear the phrase recently, doom scrolling? I think that probably applies to that, where you're just mindlessly looking at things. So I decided to do something recently, which was to get down a notepad, and I blocked down from 7 a.m. until about 10:30, 11 o'clock, which is a normal time I'm awake from. And in there were 4 lines per hour, and I would just put a little mark whenever I was doing something that wasn't productive, be it maybe checking emails or bouncing around various websites or scrolling around loads of videos on YouTube, which is one of the ways I choose to waste a lot of time, I noticed, or maybe getting hooked into some of these short videos where you just scroll and scroll and scroll and scroll, and before you know it, literally an hour can have gone by. And so over the course of a week, I started to look at this and to do an analysis. And about 3 days in, I was really, really surprised at the amount of times I was checking emails, I was bouncing around videos on YouTube, etc. It was literally, well, it was certainly more than an hour and a half a day. That's on the conservative side of things. And I was appalled, because if you take 1.5 hours and multiply that by 365 days in a year, and then divide that by 8 to get you 8 working hour days, I came up with 68.4 working days a year that I could recover very quickly simply by depriving myself of something which was idle and unnecessary anyway. You see, I think one of the biggest challenges we all face is that these devices, the people who've created the software that these run on, particularly the social platforms, their currency is your focus, my attention, your attention. That's what they crave, that's what they need, that's what their business model is. So when we feed their business model, they're the ones who've created it, we're then consuming what they've created, and we become literally mindless consumers. Now, don't get me wrong, there are times where searching through YouTube videos to try and learn a particular skill or figure out how to do something I find to be very beneficial. The challenge is the discipline within that, because quite often, you know, you can pick your phone up to do something, get sidetracked picking up on a message or something on Facebook perhaps, or Instagram, and before you know it, 10, 15, 20 minutes, an hour's gone by, and you're never going to get that hour back. So what I decided to do was this. I would deprive myself of the thing that wasn't serving me. But before I do that, I know something about habits I'd like to share with you. Most people think a habit is something you do that you don't want to do. I'd like to redefine that slightly. My definition is a habit is something you don't know you're doing, because the moment you become aware that you're doing something, whether it serves you or not, it's no longer a habit because you're aware of it. It's simply a choice. So you're actually at the very end of the circuit rather than stuck in the middle of the circuit. So the simple thing to do is to stop it. Now, I also know something particularly about life, is that you don't really get anything unless you know why you want it. In other words, reasons come first and results always come second. So the very first thing I wrote down was, what can I do? What would I like to do? How would I like to spend the time? What are my outcomes? And I started to mess with that idea, to flirt with the idea, if you will. And I was thinking back to previous projects, like when I built a car for my daughter. She really wanted a Mark IV PD 130 Golf. She had a previous 1.4 petrol Golf that she really enjoyed. I'd had several of the PD 130s, and I said, look, why don't we do this? Because I don't like stuff going, being destroyed, being thrown away, when you could upcycle it, you can recycle it, you can repurpose it. So I said, let's find one that's going to be scrapped and let's resurrect it. In other words, I'll put the time in, you pay for the parts, and we'll do that. That's exactly what we did. And this is what I built over 130 hours, just working in the evenings, a couple of hours of an evening, instead of going on YouTube or watching the television. And that took 130 hours to build it. I subsequently did another car for myself. I did an old Mercedes, and I've done quite a few old cars that way. I really enjoy doing that. Anyway, so back to this. You've got to figure out why you want something before you're going to be able to get it. So I would ask you to do this. Have a think about what you could do if you're spending like I was. In fact, why don't we do this? Why don't you start to track, if you want to, the amount of time that you're spending doing something that doesn't serve you, something mindless. How many times do you check your emails a day? See, when I was growing up, we used to get the mailman once a day. You'd respond to the mail, that was it for the day. Or you during the course of the day, you'd be doing your outbound letters. So what I decided to do was several things. One was I have cut right back on all the nonsense I was doing. I looked at it and said, there is some specific searching I want to do, which is important. The rest of it is nonsense. Let's get it out of the way. The second thing I did was turn all the notifications off on the devices. I just leave now notifications on for incoming text messages from family members and for phone calls. The rest of the time I have to go look for information, so I don't get notified about emails. The same on my computer. I don't get notified about incoming messages on the computer either. I have to go search. So what happens now is these, the babies behind me and the one in the other room there, they don't get turned on for the first 4 hours or so of the day, because I use that for deep work, for inner work, for stuff I have to think about, I have to write, I have to sketch, and I'm building in my mind so I can then go and create it elsewhere. That's been really massively beneficial for my productivity. The other thing then with the notifications off means that I choose my time to go and check my emails and to respond to emails, and I now have a 2-hour window I will do that in. I will check them immediately when we start the computers up, and then just before we finish up, and that's it. And that's been profound in the amount of work I can now get done. But that's slightly outside the scope of this. What I really want you to do is have a think about how much time you might be wasting or not being productive. Maybe it's not wasted, but you're not being productive. You're killing time, as it were. One of the things I've found really useful to do is, if I have said the computers aren't going on and I come in here and I think, oh, I could really do with checking that, I'll just sit here and I'll find something else to do. I will do anything to avoid that. And I'll tell you what, there's been so many little jobs around the house that I've been thinking, I'll do that when I've got time. Of course, you never will have time. They've all got done now, stuff on the cars. There's all sorts, people I can see. So what would you do with your 68 hours if you're going to claim back an hour and a half a day like I was able to? Maybe you can't. Maybe it's more. What would you actually do with it? How would you make that serve you? So I'm going to ask you this. Would you be willing for the next 90 days, starting now, to work out what you do with that amount of extra time, how you would spend it, why it's important to you, and keep asking that question why. Not just take the first answer. Keep digging, well, why is that important to me? And then get the answer to that, well, why is that important to me? If you'll get to 5, 6, possibly 7 levels deep, you'll find something that comes from your heart. And that's the bit that will inspire you to take action and to keep at it until you get what you want. Because with that kind of focus, all sorts of things are possible. So I hope this has been thought-provoking for you. I'd love you in the comments if you would tell me what you will do with the amount of time you'll go back, or indeed just indicate how much time you found on a daily basis that you've got getting sucked up by non-productive stuff. Now, it might be that you read a book, just some kind of novel. It's killing time, but is it killing more time than you want? Is it something you're doing to relax, or is it something you're doing because you're hiding in there? You know, same with me. What was I actually doing? I was killing time. I was getting my dopamine hits. I was thinking I was learning stuff, but when I look back at it, it had no relevance, really. It wasn't important. It's rather like sitting watching the television for 3, 4, 5, 6 hours. Turn that sucker off. Deprive your way to success. Take what's standing in your way and move it out of the way and start to create and serve yourself instead of serving these puppet masters that have created all this stuff. And by the way, one of the things you can do if you want, so that you don't spend muchos time scrolling around on this thing, is buy yourself a cheap phone that's just a phone and use that just as the phone. Now, I get these devices are important and I get they're useful, and in a lot of our life, they revolve around these devices and we use them so much, but there is a time for phone calls. There is a time for checking for these devices. And let's be mindful. I'm being mindful to me, really. Really, this message is for me more than anybody. Let's be mindful of the fact that we're in charge of our own time, and more importantly, we're in charge of our own attention, our own focus, and where we're going to put it. So might I challenge you, like I've challenged myself, to start to pay a lot of attention to where you're applying your focus, because energy follows thought. So what are you focused on, and what are you going to do with all this extra time that you can now claim back if you were spending a lot of time, like I was, doing stuff that was serving someone else and wasn't serving me? You're amazing, and I'm looking forward so much to seeing you in the next video. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye.